They were warned that the life expectancy of a machine gunner was barely 7 seconds after firing the first shot, and still these brave men carried out their duty without hesitation in the unforgiving jungles of Vietnam. They knew that pulling the trigger could instantly reveal their position to hundreds of enemy eyes, but it didn't stop them. M60 crews unleashed storms of bullets across the battlefield, cutting through foliage, smoke, and chaos to protect their fellow soldiers. They were among the most feared and respected men in their units, because everyone knew that once the pig, as the M60 was called, started roaring, the enemy would think twice before advancing, but at the same time, every enemy soldier would focus their fire on that single devastating weapon. Today, we look closer at the terrifying work these men did, and the power of the weapon that often stood between them and death after World War II. The US military learned a hard lesson from the Germans during the war. The German army had used the MG42 and MG34 machine guns with such deadly efficiency that they changed the way nations thought about infantry firepower. The United States saw how a single general-purpose machine gun could dominate a battlefield, and decided it needed a similar weapon, something light enough to move with infantry, but powerful enough to suppress large enemy forces. That's how the M60 was born, inspired by the German design, but modified for American needs in Vietnam. The M60 proved exactly why it was necessary. The jungles were thick, the heat unbearable, and the enemy often invisible, hidden among trees and trenches. Standard rifles like the M16 were not powerful enough to tear through the dense vegetation or to suppress multiple enemy positions at once. The M60 chambered for the powerful 7.62 by 51 mm NATO round provided that extra punch. It could cut through trees, bamboo, and even light cover, making it perfect for jungle warfare. Every squad that carried an M60 instantly gained an edge. The gun became the heart of their firepower. Machine gunners had one of the hardest jobs in Vietnam. They were responsible for providing suppressive fire during firefights, keeping the enemy's head down while their squad advanced or retreated. A single M60 could turn the tide of a battle by allowing the rest of the men to move safely across open ground. But this came with great danger, because once the M60 opened up, the enemy knew exactly where it was. The flash, the smoke, and the deafening sound of the gun gave away its position, and every enemy rifle, rocket, and grenade would focus in that direction. The gunner had to be quick to fire, move and fire again, constantly changing position to survive. These were split-second decisions that determined whether they lived or died. The weapon itself was both a blessing and a burden. Weighing about 23 pounds without ammo, it earned the nickname the Pig from the soldiers who carried it in the hot, humid jungles of Vietnam. Its belt-fed system allowed continuous fire, but it chewed through ammunition fast, with a rate of fire between 500 and 650 rounds per minute. A 100-round belt could be gone in just 11 seconds. The sound of it was like thunder echoing through the jungle, a sound that struck fear into enemies and gave courage to allies. But to keep it firing, the crew needed a massive amount of ammunition. How much they carried depended on their mission. Short night raids required only a few belts, maybe 3 or 4, but on larger operations, the gun team carried as much ammo as their bodies could handle. The gunner usually carried about 200 rounds. The assistant gunner carried extra barrels and a few 100-round belts, while the ammo bearer, called the mule for his thankless job, carried boxes of heavy ammunition. Often, everyone in the squad helped carry belts draped around their necks, along with their other gear. Each belt weighed roughly 6 pounds, and together the team could carry anywhere from 1,200 to 4,000 rounds. The more the better every 5th round in. Those belts was a tracer. It glowed bright red when fired, letting the gunner see exactly where his shots were landing at night. These tracer rounds were crucial. They helped helicopter crews identify friendly positions and avoid hitting their own men during chaotic firefights. The glow of the tracers cutting through the dark was both beautiful and terrifying, like streaks of red lightning in the night sky. The M60's power made it one of the most respected weapons of the war. It was the squad's lifeline, the tool that could hold off an ambush or destroy an enemy position in seconds. But the price of that power was the life of the gunner himself. Those who carried the M60 lived on the edge. Every time they opened fire, they became the center of attention for the enemy. Their survival depended on speed, teamwork, and sheer willpower. Even with its flaws, the M60 became a symbol of American strength and resilience in the harshest conditions of Vietnam. Many of the soldiers who carried it still remember the heavy metallic feel, the constant heat from the barrel, and the ringing sound in their ears. After each firefight, the weapon might have been called a pig, but for the men whose lives it saved, it was nothing less than a savior in a place where every second counted. United States forces used red tracers, while the Viet Cong typically used green ones. This difference in color was more than just visual. It became a deadly signature in the night skies of Vietnam. Every streak of red or green light told a story of survival and destruction. The tracers glowed brightly through the darkness, guiding soldiers as they aimed and fired, and sometimes revealing their own positions to the enemy. Although soldiers constantly complained about the exhausting weight of the M60 and the hundreds of rounds they had to carry, no one ever complained. When they found themselves in a firefight with plenty of ammunition, the men knew that in the chaos of an ambush or a sudden jungle skirmish, having extra belts of ammo meant the difference between life and death. However, even with all that ammunition, fierce and prolonged engagements could burn through supplies alarmingly fast. And when a gunner heard the dreaded click of an empty belt in the middle of battle, it was every soldier's nightmare in that moment. The M60's terrifying roar would go silent, leaving the team dangerously exposed, despite the weapon's weight and the burden it placed on its crew. The M60 gave soldiers something priceless: ability to unleash a torrent of suppressive fire, capable of halting entire enemy advances within seconds. The sound alone was enough to freeze the enemy. The weapon's deep, rhythmic thunder echoing through the jungle was a constant reminder of American firepower. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army came to fear it deeply. But they were also clever, and learned quickly that taking out the M60 gunner early was the key to turning the tide of battle in any firefight. The first bursts of enemy fire were almost always directed at the gunner. They knew that if they could silence the pig, as the Americans called it, the rest of the squad would lose its heaviest firepower and its ability to fight back effectively. Snipers, too, were trained specifically to target machine gunners first, and this tactic led to higher casualties among M60 crews than almost any other role in the infantry. Being a gunner was not just physically exhausting, but mentally punishing every time they moved into a new patrol. They knew they were the enemy's primary target. It took courage and nerves of steel to shoulder the weapon, knowing that survival depended on quick reflexes, teamwork, and luck to reduce these risks. Machine gun teams were carefully organized to react instantly to any sign of an ambush. A standard team consisted of the gunner, 2 riflemen who carried additional belts of ammunition, and a non-commissioned officer who led the team, directed their movement, and made quick decisions under fire. Technically, one man in the team was supposed to carry a tripod for setting up the gun, but in reality, that plan rarely worked. The tripod was far too heavy to carry through the dense jungles, and slowed the men down, so most squads left it behind. Instead, they relied on mobility and the ability to fire from almost any position, lying prone, kneeling, or even from the hip. When things got desperate in the early stages of the war, inexperienced units often made serious mistakes with their ammunition. Some soldiers wore belts of linked ammo across their shoulders, like Pancho Villa, thinking it looked bold and heroic. But this method was completely impractical in the jungle. The loose belts would snag on vines, tree branches, or equipment. They would bend links or collect mud and leaves, all of which could jam the weapon at the worst possible moment in battle. Some inexperienced teams also made the mistake of loading only short ammo belts into the M60, meaning they had to stop and reload constantly when sustained fire was most needed. Experienced gun crews quickly learned to avoid these errors. They knew that keeping the weapon clean and the belts properly linked was a matter of survival before every mission. The teams carefully checked and rechecked their ammo belts, ensuring no links were twisted or dirty. Some clever gunners even adapted cloth bags, originally designed for M18 Claymore mines, using them to carry 200 to 300 rounds of linked ammunition, ready to fire at a moment's notice. This allowed them to move quickly and still have enough firepower to respond to a sudden attack for patrols or defensive setups. Some M60 crews went even further, linking multiple belts together. 2 or 3 100-round belts would be joined into one long continuous feed, and in some cases, helicopter or base gunners used massive 750-round belts packed into metal cans originally designed for miniguns. These setups allowed for long, uninterrupted bursts of devastating fire that could hold back waves of attackers. The M60 was not only used on the ground, it also became one of the most vital weapons mounted on helicopters. Both gunships and transport Huey's door gunners armed with M60s became the lifeline of the skies. Their job was to protect the aircraft and the soldiers it carried from enemy ambushes and ground fire. They faced constant danger from bullets and rockets while firing from open doors in midair. It was one of the most dangerous and nerve-wracking jobs of the war. The red and green tracers from these helicopter-mounted M60s streaked through the night like fiery comets lighting up the darkness below. We have a special video that explores the horrifying experiences and unbelievable bravery of these door gunners, which you can watch after this. Their courage and the relentless firepower of the M60 left a mark on every battle. They fought forever, changing the face of modern combat. The gun was not without its flaws. Though the M60 had a reputation for raw power, it also came with a set of serious challenges that every gunner had to live with and overcome. One of the most common problems was overheating during long bursts of fire when the barrel glowed red hot. From the intense heat, the weapon could become almost impossible to handle during heavy firefights. When gunners unleashed hundreds of rounds to suppress the enemy, the metal would expand and the weapon could jam or lose accuracy, forcing the crew to replace the barrel quickly to keep it running smoothly. Although it required fewer barrel changes than some older machine guns, it still demanded constant attention to avoid overheating. Jamming was another constant enemy, especially in the harsh and unforgiving jungles of Vietnam, where mud rain and dirt crept into every moving part of the weapon. The gunner had to be almost obsessive about keeping the weapon clean and well-oiled, wiping it down after every patrol and covering it carefully to protect it from the elements. But after days of crawling through mud-climbing hills and sleeping in wet trenches, even the most disciplined crews found it hard to maintain their guns perfectly clean in those conditions. The machine gun became both a lifeline and a burden. Another terrifying malfunction known as running away haunted many gunners. This occurred when the weapon continued firing uncontrollably, even after the gunner released the trigger. Once it started, the M60 would keep firing on its own until the ammunition belt ran out in the chaos of battle. This was a nightmare situation. The gunner had to physically wrestle the weapon, trying to keep it pointed toward the enemy and away from friendly soldiers, while the assistant gunner desperately tried to yank the belt out to stop the feed. The sound of the weapon firing uncontrollably in short, violent bursts was enough to send panic through the entire squad. Not only could it waste hundreds of rounds, but it also risked causing friendly casualties and damaging the gun beyond repair in the middle of combat. With bullets flying from all directions, such a malfunction could mean disaster. Reloading the M60 was thankfully a quick and efficient process, but it still required calm nerves and practiced hands. The gunner would flip open the top cover, lay a fresh belt of ammunition in place, snap the cover down, and be ready to fire again, all within seconds. But even this simple act needed absolute focus, because a poorly aligned belt or a single loose link could jam the gun in the middle of a fight. After firing a few hundred rounds, the barrel had to be changed before it overheated and warped. This was where teamwork was critical. The assistant gunner, using a thick glove, would grab the glowing red hot barrel, twist it out, and replace it with a cool one as quickly as possible. This process had to be done calmly and precisely, even while enemy rounds were snapping. Overhead, the smell of burning metal and gunpowder filled the air as the team worked together to keep the weapon alive. Despite all these problems, a well-trained M60 team could completely turn the tide of a battle in just moments. Their ability to lay down heavy, sustained fire could pin entire enemy squads, allowing their comrades to maneuver and survive. Every soldier in the patrol relied on the machine gunner's skill and endurance, because when ambushed, it was the M60 that spoke first and loudest. The bond between the gunner and his weapon was intense. Operators knew every detail of their M60s, every sound, every movement. They practiced breaking the gun down and reassembling it again and again until it became second nature. Some even trained blindfolded to prepare for night operations or low-visibility conditions. Competitions were often organized among crews to see who could strip and reassemble the gun the fastest under pressure, showing how vital mastery of the weapon was to survival over the years. The M60 evolved through several improved versions. Engineers listened to the complaints and experiences of Vietnam veterans, leading to models like the M60E3 and the M60E4, which fixed many of the early design flaws. These newer variants were lighter, more durable and easier to maintain. While keeping the same ferocious rate of fire, they became even more efficient and reliable, earning respect from new generations of soldiers, even though the M60 was first developed. Decades ago, it has never truly disappeared from service. Its modern versions continue to see action in military units around the world, standing as proof of the weapon's enduring power and design. The M60 is remembered not only by those who carried it, but also by those who found themselves under its devastating rain of fire. It became more than just a machine gun. It was a symbol of strength, fear, and survival in the chaos of war. If you found this story fascinating, stay tuned for the next one, where we dive into the world of helicopter door gunners who faced some of the most terrifying and vital missions of the Vietnam War. Their courage and the roar of their M60s in the open skies became legendary among soldiers who fought below. And that brings us to the end of this story of courage, firepower, and survival in the unforgiving jungles of Vietnam. The M60 was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of the determination and grit of the soldiers who carried it through mud, rain, and chaos. Their bravery and skill turned a flawed machine into one of the deadliest tools of the war, proving that true strength comes not from the weapon, but from the hands that wield it. If you enjoyed this deep look into history and the stories of those who changed it, make sure to subscribe and stay connected, because there are many more powerful tales waiting to be told. This is TruthLine, where every story reveals the reality behind the legend.